Hey everybody, I'm Jason Preston, one of the co-founders of Dent, along with Steve Broback, who's here with us. We're also here with Mónica Guzmán. This is a Dent Live episode. It's a show that we've revived from years gone by, which is a conversational format, sort of a live conversation, much like the fireside chat conversations we've traditionally done at the Dent conference for, what, 8 years now, Steve? 8 years of Dent?
Years. Yeah.
My goodness. So Mónica, in addition to being married to me, is an award-winning journalist and an entrepreneur herself. And she's working on a book, which is has a publisher, is going to come out in a couple of years, 2022, and is going to be really, as she is, a really fascinating look through a lens at how we behave, how we have conversations, how we're curious, and all things like that. And so, this is an opportunity to kind of converse about what kinds of things are going on in our world, how it's changing around us day to day, and get her perspective on all of that. So, hi, Mónica. Thanks for joining us again.
Hi. Hey there. Nice to be here as always.
Awesome. I thought we'd start. So, Steve and I were talking earlier today about how, in the past week since we talked last week to now, last week we ended with we had these questions of the week that was on each of our minds, and one of the things that was on Steve's mind was about how this process of, what is it going to look like for us to go back to normalcy, and what is normal going to be? How close to old normal is it going to be? And at this point, Steve, I'll let you flesh this concept out a little bit more, because I think it was, more your thought than mine. But we've gone from not really knowing when we will get out of a state of lockdown to now feeling like, I think more and more it's clear that people are out and about already. And increasingly, just the pressure has built up so much that we are getting back to things. And maybe, and I think your view of that is different than my view, and Monica's view, I'm sure, is a little bit different than the two of ours. But why don't you start us off with your sense of where we are on that, and where you think we're going, as I take a sip of my beverage.
I'm a little confused. You think you're not confused as to where we're at. I'm a little unsure as to where we're at because it's so geographically diverse. People are doing different things in different locations. So I kind of feel like what I'm doing right now is really no different than a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So I sort of feel like I'm still in stasis here. But if we were to jump ahead 6 months, 8 months, I think there is this zone of reality that I kind of like, okay, what would I not be surprised by? And I don't think I would be surprised if we were largely back to the old normal with maybe some, okay, we're not hugging, we're not shaking hands as much. We are a little more careful about distance, but largely we're back to normal. That would not surprise me. It would not surprise me if we are still wearing masks all the time, if you're limiting your ability to go into places. I would be surprised if we're all still locked down at home. But so within that zone, I think I am more prone to believe, especially after what I've read of late today, that it's more likely we're going to be 90+% normal with some minor modifications. That's sort of my guess.
And I want to push you on that a little to say, like, the scenario that you're painting in your mind, on balance, good, bad. I mean, there's no indication that I've seen. New York is opening up little pieces here and there. Other states are far more open. States have, taken different approaches. Like you mentioned, China is locking new territories down again. Right. Because there's resurgence, right? We still, in the toolkit, pretty much the only tool is a fairly severe approach to keeping people apart against this virus. So
Well, you're absolutely right, because it's so geographically different. What they're doing in Oklahoma is very different than what they're doing in Manhattan. I believe that will remain the case. They're going to be treating it differently in 6 to 8 months. But NYU today announced they're going back. Students will be returning in the fall to campus.
let me ask, and Monica, you should answer this too if you have an opinion on it. Do you think that in do you think that what has happened is that people have sort of had a look at both futures, both approaches, and by and large, individuals are doing the mental calculus to say, well, this is what it looks like if we all mostly stay at home, and this is what it looks like if we all, mostly are exposed to the virus. And in 6 months, with, if we're really at 90% of our social activity, we have to assume there's going to be a lot more transmission of the virus. Hospitals are going to be under a heavy load. There's going to be a lot of death, but we're going to just take that as a cost. Is that what people are? Do you think that's where people are going?
Well, I've heard the phrase quarantine fatigue. The word fatigue comes up whenever anything abnormal lasts too long, because I think that there's an expiration date on novelty inside all of us. And after a while, something that feels really different feels like it ought to end. And my guess is that a lot of people, no matter where they lie on their perspectives, are starting to feel, if they haven't already for a while, that that this abnormality ought to end. And that's natural and normal. And so either in our brains, we are really leaning hard toward that and looking for evidence to say, this will end. This will end for me. This will end for me in these ways. I can find evidence in these countries and in these approaches that this makes sense. I can find my sort of bad guys in the news and other places that are against this conclusion I've drawn. And then I think you can go the other way and say, I'm feeling the fatigue. It feels like the abnormality should end. But no, maybe there's an overwhelming amount of evidence keeping me on this camp, or, because it is falling along some political lines. I feel like I ought to, like people who are like me ought to believe that this should not end, or that this really will not be normal for a while, and that my real work is to adapt to a new normal and try to bring down this feeling that, oh no, this is all just like, a couple of months or a few months we're going to be talking about later as being really strange, but then everything else kind of came back. And when I try to sit and look at that question objectively, I come up not knowing. And by the way, that's our daughter, who's having technical difficulties with the TV. So our host has disappeared for a moment. But that's okay, because Steve was actually, before we started taping, going, it would make this podcast great is if one of your kids showed up. So
that said, we needed kids in the podcast. So.
Yeah, I know. But
they're so adorable.
She just wants the TV to work. So we're taking care of that. Yeah.
I hope she's watching SpongeBob.
She is watching something called Puff and Rock, but we'll talk about that later. It's a really cute show.
Oh, okay.
It's a good show. But I think, even the question we are asking ourselves is worth looking deeper at. The fact that people put this in the framework of normal. We don't ask each other to be descriptive. We say, compare where you think you're going to be to what I believe normal is, what you believe normal is, to some shared sense of normal. That's our baseline. And that's what matters to us, is we still have, most of us, an expectation of what life ought to look like. And if this thing is really going to change what life ought to look like in a deep way for a long time, then whoa, then you need to shift your mindset. You need to be in a whole new place. Some people maybe are creeping toward that place, but I think most people don't want to be in that place, and we want to find reasons why we don't need to be.
There's lots of good evidence for why, but you mentioned this earlier. If you're seeking out evidence, there's plenty to be found. I mean, some remarkable news yesterday about a potential vaccine. It's now no longer irrational to think that by the end of the year, a vaccine could be available. We do know without a doubt the fatality rate is a fraction of what it was first assumed when we went under lockdown. So, and we also now have a much clearer idea of who is most at risk, and a gigantic swath of the population is really at extremely low risk. So
it's funny because we've wandered into the core of what my kind of question of the week is, and I will want to revisit a little bit of this later, but it hasn't been clear cut. It's never been clear cut so far to me, any of this information. For example, I hesitate to bring this up because I haven't done any checking on this myself, but I understand that for example, the vaccine that shows promise is using a technology that has never been used in any vaccine before, and has shown some creepy things in animals. Like it's an mRNA vaccine, so you put some programming into people which gives a person the instructions to make certain proteins. And when they've done this in animals over time, it begins to manufacture different proteins than the one they're meant to manufacture.
Have we learned nothing from the radioactive spider experiments? The early.
So what we really need is a Spider-Man. This is the birth of X-Men. But like I said, I sort of hesitate to bring it up, except to make the point that there is like arguing with my son sometimes. Anytime you give him one reason to think positively or negatively about something, he has a ready answer as to the opposite.
Exactly.
Right. And that's how everything feels in this process.
Yep.
I think that there's, Monica, what you were saying, I think there's something really profound in this idea that I think you've hit it. There is a section of the population for whom this is the time to work on accepting an inevitable and lifelong change. And there's a section of the population that does not, that feels that is not where we're at, and that we ought to be hopeful, and not just hopeful, but working towards getting back to an existence that a lot of us were, granted we have problems and everybody has problems, but a lot of us were more or less happy with from a health perspective, right? It was like, okay, we're not walking around, wearing masks in the United States because we're not afraid that we are going to be killed by a pathogen that comes to us on a plane just because we're sitting there.
Yeah. We had this conversation with my parents recently, that regardless of what governments do, it really is what people feel confident about. Mm-hmm. That's really all that matters at the end of the day. There's no way, I mean, I don't want to jinx it, but it'd be really hard for a government to try to enforce a stay-at-home order when the population does not agree.
Well, that was my exact point. I was saying weeks ago, is people just are not, months ago, is saying this will last for a while, but this cannot be to the long-term situation.
What's frustrating? Sorry, go ahead. Finish.
Anyway, Ezekiel Emanuel was saying, well, we can't really end the lockdown until there's a vaccine, and I'm like, it's going to end whether this is not the decision of a political.
So that's the frustrating thing, is if only everyone were on board with a certain set of criteria, and that we could measure progress toward that criteria in a perfectly credible way to all parties. We can't. And so this is about feelings, and like no one likes to talk about that because feelings are squishy and changing, but this is right now all about feelings for a lot of people, until maybe we can get more of that evidence and the kinds of, like you mentioned, Steve, right? The market went up a good bit on the news that the vaccine test was encouraging. Does that mean it will succeed? No, but it's encouraging, right? The market does that stuff all the time. Like, the market is about feelings,
Right, but
so
now the market, when we first started this lockdown and when things really got scary, the market dropped a significant 30%, and it's come back. Half of that has been gained back. And so I've been getting into this. When I talk to the real pessimists, I go, well, I don't know. I'm a big believer, as you guys have heard me say many times, William Goldman, nobody knows anything. So I don't know what to believe, but I do believe that the millions and millions of investors have have significantly more confidence than a whole lot of other people do. So I definitely factored the stock market into my analysis of how bad is this going to be. And it factored that there's some good evidence the market was really overvalued when this began. Now it's sort of like,
right.
well.
Yep, but I imagine, someone living in New York City who is in one of the neighborhoods that's hardest hit, who knows a couple people who've died. Like, the same facts presented to all these different people are just not going to be interpreted equally for a while until there is some, like, everyone wants to run behind this one fact that is so unifying and so crystal clear to everyone. I just don't know what that would be. So too bad that we don't have that set criteria.
Everyone's got, my opinion is people have to assimilate all the facts that they pick up, and they can filter through them to whatever degree they want, and then they can make their own decision as to what risks they want to take for themselves.
Right.
Now, where it gets problematic is there are externalities that means the risks you take now become risky to others.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not the risk to you only, it's the risk to you and the ones who you love, right, presumably, and come in contact with. And if you go kill your grandparent, how do you feel about that? I want to prompt some discussion here, because the Journal a couple days ago ran a question and answer series where they had people provide answers to the question, what would make you comfortable enough to return to dining in at a restaurant? And I think it's a really interesting spread of answers from different parts of the country. And I want to read a few of them and then just kind of get your reactions to the difference in the answers and sort of where they seem to come from, because I think it's a really interesting data point as part of this discussion. The first answer is tongue-in-cheek from Minnesota. The answer in its entirety is an open sign. Somebody in Indiana says, I'm honestly not that worried. I've been delivering food from many restaurants through DoorDash, and I've seen many new procedures in place that put me at least partially at ease. Sanitizing everything all the time. There are always signs everywhere encouraging social distancing. As long as restaurants keep things clean, I'm happy to return. Somebody in Florida says, well, in addition to deep cleaning, disinfecting of the dining rooms, counters, and restrooms, good ventilation of the spaces to ensure clearance of any infected droplets potentially hanging in the air, masks and gloves for all, social distancing, a digital device posting the time of the most recent cleaning of the facility, and instead of counter service, an automat-style area with heated compartments for the food, which is ordered, illuminated by ultraviolet light for disinfection.
My goodness.
Contactless and disinfected
Sounds like my
food
bathroom.
I want your automated system, because we haven't managed to keep up with the bathroom cleaning routine as we should have.
No, kidding, of course.
Ohio, I will have no problem doing so. I will adhere to the new rules as they pertain to each community and establishment. Our occasional dining out is a real treat for us. Frankly, we've eaten out more during this crisis than ever before in an effort to support our local restaurants. Someone in Illinois says, this is easy. Be younger.
Yeah.
Someone in Colorado says, I'm comfortable right now. I've heard from friends in Texas and Florida that have gone to restaurants, and they said it was no problem. So that's just a smattering of answers that the Wall Street Journal collected from around the country. And
I have to say, I really wish that we would stop looking at states as granular enough of an origin point, because Colorado, where?
Mm-hmm.
Denver, Boulder, or a mountain town? Density is the variable. If you have a restaurant that's got all this space and just a few people come in and everybody knows each other, then I get it. But if you're in downtown Seattle, I just wish I had that context. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I will. That's funny you bring that up, because I do hope. I guess I'm not sure I really hope this, but my gut reaction has me hoping it. This is the end of the sardine can restaurants in Seattle where you're packed in cheek to jowl. It's incredibly noisy. You can't have a conversation. Teeny tiny little tables. I'm like, oh, if this changes that
that's the thing. This could change all of restaurant economy because the reason those are sardine restaurants is because of rent.
Except
they can't afford anything bigger.
Because so much of it's real estate. What it means is, are you going to pay twice as much for an entree and all that? So, but I was just talking to one of our fellow denters about this just prior to this conversation. He's in Maui. We're talking about, Hawaii has had their rate of fatality is 1 death per million, which ties them for last place with a couple of other states. And he said, yeah, and our problem is like it's like each island is like its own state, because Oahu is not at all like Maui.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm over 60, but I've also I've recovered from COVID.
Right.
And
so
and you should tell everyone, by the way, that really quickly about that you're, because people hear that and go,
Oh, for me, it was a piece of cake, and for my wife, it was 2 weeks in bed, and for a friend of ours who we just saw recently, he was in the hospital for a week, so it's a mixed bag. But so for me personally, any restaurant, anywhere, anytime, as long as they have a good wine list, I would go.
Do you feel better because you have antibodies?
My speculation is that I have some immunity for some perhaps limited period of time.
Right.
But I also am guessing that even if I don't have full immunity because I did get through it, if I get it again, it's probably I have a better trained immune system. So I don't know. But I think when this thing first emerged in early March and they were saying 3 to 4% death rate, and we got into a lockdown, and then we really got a better handle on it, and it's just a tiny fraction of that. I think for my personal choices, I want to go live my life, and dining out's an important part of that.
Yeah.
Because you guys know.
That's tricky. I'm sort of sitting on the fact that I've picked up cooking in a big way. I'm like, well, why don't we just cook a lot more? But I think it's because, and Jason knows this, I've actually gotten like legit really excited about cooking, but I miss eating out so much, but I currently don't feel that comfortable with it.
I want to suggest something before we do because we'll have to move on to our sort of questions of the week pretty soon. But I want to suggest this. There was an article in the New Yorker by Dr. Atul Gawande, who's a well-known author, respected author, and a surgeon. But he's written he's also a staff writer at the New Yorker, and he's written a couple of times about basically what can we learn from the medical, what hospitals are doing, because hospitals are, he makes the point, his hospital system in Massachusetts is sending 75,000 people to work every day in close quarters, and are keeping infections low, not zero, but very low, the transmission that happens in their hospital system. And he says there's basically 4 components to it, and I'm going to get them slightly wrong because he doesn't actually make a bullet list in the article, so I would have to actually scroll around and find it. But it's essentially mask wearing, hand washing, regular screening, right? So every day he goes to work, he has to take out his phone and he has to self-report. I don't have a headache, I don't have a cough, I don't have a sore throat, I don't have a runny nose. And then they go, okay, you can go to work. Otherwise, you get in queue and get tested. And that still takes a few days, and you can't go to work during those few days. But during those few days, you're also, if you do have it, you're not infecting other people. And there's a 4th thing, because he said it's a four-step thing. But what's fascinating is the idea that the adoption of these kinds of behaviors in wider society as we go back to work is not going to be dependent on the science of it. It's going to be dependent on the culture of how it is viewed where people are. And I wonder if you two have thoughts about that and how that's going to affect how this plays out.
You're saying that it's not going to be dependent on the science of it because the science only tells us, our best guess, what we know, right? But the culture tells us how we respond. Is that why? Because only the culture tells us how we respond.
What I mean is, if 3 weeks ago, when I went to the grocery store wearing a mask, I felt like an asshole. I'm one of 5% of the people in the store wearing a mask. It feels very strange. Yesterday, I went to the grocery store, and I think I saw one person not wearing a mask, and I thought that
Right.
was weird.
Yeah.
But we're in Seattle, where the culture has become
Yeah.
that you should wear a mask. I believe there are, and I've heard anecdotally that there are parts of the country where if you wear a mask, that is a
Yeah.
strange choice, right?
Yeah.
And that's perhaps the most visible of these things, right? Screening and hand washing and things like that. But these behaviors are going to be adopted the same way any group behaviors are going to be
Right.
adopted. It's going to be based on how you feel it belongs in your peer group. I believe that's my contention. If you
Absolutely.
disagree,
No, I
go
think
for
that's
it.
true. I
But
think that's absolutely true. No, I think in communities where it is part of, because it's happened in some places, it is part of the identity, of being in that community, that you don't buy this, you don't buy what's going on, do you? You wouldn't wear a mask, right? And so if someone actually, let's say, really wants to wear a mask, they will be motivated not to. In the universe where actually, believe it or not, the people in the cities don't like this, but this actually isn't that big a deal, then okay, no big consequence there, right? But if the universe where actually this is actually a huge deal, then that person and everyone else is in more danger because of motivated reasoning that we do naturally as humans, based on who we feel we belong with and the signals we send to everyone around us. So it's true. Yeah. I mean, going to a grocery store and you're the only one with a mask, even if you believe wholeheartedly as an individual that you should wear that mask, no matter how strongly you believe in that, the group dynamics and the fact that we are social creatures means that you are going to have to justify that to yourself over and over and over and over again because it is abnormal, which brings us full circle back to the early discussion about what is normal. We're obsessed with what is normal. So
There's
what
more
doesn't
to it.
feel normal,
I think
we're
there's
going to
more to
have
it
to
than that.
justify.
In terms of game theory, the mask is not about protecting you from the germs, because the germs can get it. It's about you protecting others. So if I were to walk into an environment where no one is wearing a mask, then I might feel, these. Let me put it a different way. I can understand someone who says, if I walk into a place and no one's wearing a mask, A, I don't want to be an outcast, and B, why am I protecting them when they're not protecting me? So anyway, I think
it's
there's
true,
more
but I don't
to
want to fixate on the mask because it's about,
well,
the idea is here's an example from a hospital system that puts nearly 100,000 people to work and doesn't see a lot of infection. If we had that rate of infection in society at large, this thing would go away. We could actually go back to normal life plus these four things, right? But the adoption of these four things, the mask is the visible one, so sorry for leading us off with that. But it's not
can we
just
all
the
agree
theory of
the
the mask,
person?
it's the whole behavior.
Yeah, it's the whole dynamic.
It's that you have to.
I'd like to get agreement. The person walking the dog, no one within 100 yards of him, wearing a mask. The person driving alone, wearing a mask. It's like, I don't think that makes a lot of sense. But I'm sorry, that's my little pet peeve. It's like,
Really?
okay.
You don't know how they got there, but yes. Because the thing is, it's actually, the term is aseptic behavior, I think. Right? So it's like you put on a mask, you walk around, you have to assume that the mask is a
Infected.
A tainted surface.
Yes.
And so if you can't safely remove it, or you need to go back through a contaminated environment. So it's like, yes, I passed through a contaminated small, staircase and elevator to take my dog outside. Wow. And I have to go back inside through that. And in the meantime, I'm not going to take the mask off because then I'm popping the particles out and I got to.
Well, in terms of culture, we had that situation in, I think it was Iran, where you have thousands and thousands of people that come to I think it's to kiss this statue. And it was clearly a spreader of the disease, and people said, we don't care, this is what we do. So the power of culture is incredibly, and religion is very powerful.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think it's going to be a struggle. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It might be fun to talk about this a little bit more next week or in future conversations. I want to take us to, we do a question of the week, what's on your mind? And we can each kind of, give our little riff on our thoughts in response to each question. Monica, do you want to start us off with your question?
Yeah, I have a dangerous question that y'all don't have to answer. But the question is, are you thinking about people you know differently because of their response to the pandemic and how it might be different from yours? And there's a reason I asked that, which is that, in a conversation, a friend sort of told me, I am thinking about people differently. I didn't think that so-and-so and so-and-so would do these things that I find not great. And I'm thinking about my friends differently. And I thought, wow, now that makes me want to know how common is that response?
That's interesting. I actually, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's that dangerous of a question. I think the answer is, of course, I think of people differently because of the way they respond to the situation.
But people
people I know. Yeah, no, people I know. And I don't necessarily, I think that I get that data from how they respond to any kind of crisis or sudden change or just a value laden choice. I mean, we have friends that I judge, not judge, I don't know, judge is probably right. I judge people when I go to their weddings, right? What choices did you make? Did you have a religious ceremony? Did you not? How many people did you have? Did you have a party? Did you serve food or did you serve, plant-based proteins? What? I make judgments about people based on that. It doesn't mean that I don't think of them as friends still. It doesn't mean that so yeah, of course. But I view it as sort of not, here's a friend I'm going to remove from my life or a friend I'm going to remove from a list of people I would hang out with. I view it more as information about who they are. Maybe I'll get them a more accurate birthday present in the future,
That's well said. Yeah, I got that.
I'm sort of a mind that I've always, you guys maybe heard me say this before because I've said it for many years, is when you combine minuscule risk and incredible loss in the same scenario, in the same situation, I think pretty much any reaction to that for any individual is reasonable. So for example, people that say, I don't fly on airplanes, I'm like, okay, that's not my choice, but I think I get how you got there. And other people that ride motorcycles, it's like, well, okay, maybe I do get a little judgy on that one. But so in this case, no, I don't. Nobody came to mind that I went, oh gosh, what a choice they made. Now, maybe if I lived in Seattle, I would I would do more of that. I don't know. Now I am being judgy.
I was gonna say, if you saw a friend of yours walk down the street walking their dog
with a mask,
10 yards, no one in a mask,
I would say, no, I just view it as sort of, it's like a superficial visible IQ test. Sorry, now I'm being sick. I'm kidding.
No, but that's why it's a dangerous question, because if we're honest, we all judge all the time. We just can't admit it.
Right. But I really do think when you've got those two things, minuscule risk, huge loss, catastrophic loss, it's like, okay, wherever you are on that, I get it.
I really like that scale, and I feel like I've probably adopted it to my own worldview, Steve. Because I've known, because we talked about it with plane flying and fear of flying, years ago. You and I did.
Right, because I know you've got your quirks, and I've got my own in that regard that are, and it's like I just don't really view them as that quirky, because I just think it's too hard to rationally measure those two and throw them against each other.
Yeah, it's well put. I think it's a cocktail of risk aversion, which actually, Jason and I were talking with friends the other night and about our respective kids, and even when they're like 5 years old, you can tell who's more risk averse, right? There's a risk aversion or more risky behavior, and then there's the information you see and read and how much time you have for it and how you all calculate it together, and somehow at the other end of that is, here's my friend who's being, I think, very a little too cautious, but I'm going to smile as I say that, and here's my friend who isn't taking this seriously at all, and I don't know what the hell's going on, and then there's everyone in between.
We had that guy. We had I'm spacing on his name, but at our Dent dinner in LA, that's the wingsuit glider guy, professional. That, I mean, there, and Jill Heiner, the cave diver. like, wow, the two riskiest things you can possibly do. But of course, there's a great ROI
Don't
on
forget the space station.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Kate. Oh,
What's your risk of blowing up?
gosh, going up with the
Yes.
shuttle. I think I'll go
Yeah.
up with the space shuttle. Whatever your sense of that is okay.
Maybe we should get Katie on and ask her about risk aversion.
Oh
Yeah,
boy,
we should.
you know what? Katie and Jill and
It might
Richard
be an interesting
Brown.
thing to do.
Richard
Yeah.
Brown, the guy who's made the flying Iron Man suit. That's yeah.
So let me I want to move us on because we could go on forever.
Yeah, we could.
We talked about I referenced this earlier, that my question of the week, we're sort of in the heart of it earlier, and the way I phrased it was, how do we strike the balance between hope and prudence? But I also really love Monica, what you called out earlier is this, there is sort of an open question in my mind of how much change I have to make internally about who I am and how I live in the world, right? My view of how this universe works, because that's tough work, right? It's very hard to let go of things that that I know and that I love, whether it's going to a restaurant or a museum or just flying on planes, which I actually, I like going. I miss the travel. It's been 3 months and I miss the travel, and I don't know how much I should work to acceptance of a new reality, which is lessened in some way on those things and will, blossom into other, things elsewhere, versus how much I should just have hope that it's like, oh yeah, like this is this is an automatic, it's prestige and power and money. It's an automatic Nobel Prize. It's a bargaining chip. And it's a whole lot of money if you figure this thing out. And so everyone in the world, literally, I don't know what a good example is. If Cuba develops a safe and effective vaccine, and they're the only ones who have it, then they get to say, okay, US, it's your turn to dance. Like there's so much motivation to figure this out that it's sort of like asking, okay, is there a problem humanity can't solve? I should have hope.
Yeah.
Or should I, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to walk this balance, and that's sort of a long question, I guess, but that's my question.
No, that is the frame of mind that I prefer, that I accept and I prefer. When I step into the frame of mind of, like, I love science fiction. I love thinking about what humanity is capable of, and like all these alternate universes where you ask what if, and here's how humanity that made things this way or that way. How cool. Like, we really are capable of insanely awesome things. And that is the frame of mind I prefer. After a lot of negative headlines and stuff, for me to just sit back and be like, we don't know the limits. We don't know the limits, and we're being pushed to exceed them. Vaccine timelines are X. But, there's a lot of motivation to make them a whole lot shorter. And we might just do it. And that's exciting. That makes me really happy thinking about things that way.
There's a book that came out about 20 years ago called Triumph of the Optimists, which is directly related to America and how America keeps going through horrible, horrible times, and the optimists always end up being right. I mean, the Great Depression, World War II, in my lifetime, the Vietnam era was really bad. And Jason's heard me bring this up before. There were 2,000 domestic bombings in the United States, during that period, or just immediately, as the war was winding down. That Barry Maguire song from 1965, Eve of Destruction, listen to that, and that's like, okay, that was the mindset. It was a little before its time, a couple years later. And so anyway, I'm incredibly hopeful and frankly pretty much sure that this too shall pass.
Yeah.
So I'm not in the mindset at all, and I've been wrong before many times, but this is just another thing we're going through, and we're going to get through it, and then it's going to be largely status quo again.
Steve, what's your question for this week?
What weird trick? No, not weird trick. What weird thing are you doing that's got you sort of like, oh, I'm kind of obsessive about this than I didn't used to be before this lockdown happened. And I'll admit mine is we were watching a lot more TV, of course. And every show where they are in a really cool looking restaurant or bar, especially if it's in a town that I go to sometimes, I have to know what it is. And so I'm like pausing, Googling, writing it down, throwing it into Evernote. And usually there's articles on how cool this place is. I'm like, oh my gosh, throw it in Evernote, tag it. So I'm all set because I'm going to go there. That's my thing. So what's your thing?
That's awesome.
Jason, you go next. I don't have a thing yet, but I have a thing in the back, but I want to get a better thing. So you do your thing.
Huh. I have. So this, I think this qualifies. It's quirky. I have become a power cord Nazi. So I'm weirdly particular about, like, I have to have. I've worked from home occasionally and at the office like you for a long time, and I have to have the full setup in both places. I gotta have the monitor, I gotta have the adapters, I gotta have the power cords. And I actually have a power cord that I keep at my desk and for the laptop, and I have a power cord that I keep in the office for the laptop, although that's here now. I went and got that before we went into shelter in place. And then I have one that is in my bag. So I have 3 power cords, and I have one for each station, and then I have one that's in my travel bag. Because that's organization for me. I got to have it. And the same kind of thing is true with power cords for, like, charging phones around the house. And it is completely disrupted by the fact that Julian, our son, now knows how to pull a power cord out of the wall and plug it into the, like, kid phone that he uses for his, kid messenger time and stuff. And Monica, bless her heart, has no regard whatsoever for what power cord came from where, to the point that she doesn't know she took it and she doesn't know where she left it, and it just drives me nuts. And there was, please just tell me where. Yeah. Just tell me where you need power cords, and I'll put them there so you don't have to take mine.
Redundancy. Von Neumann redundancy.
My favorite question that Jason asks me about this is, "Where's my power cord?" And I'm like, they all look the same.
They're fungible.
I don't know where your power. It's just the power cord to me. It's a power cord.
So Vicky has gotten USB. Her USB cables, she puts a little V on them in Sharpie, and it's like, would you think that's going to stop me? That doesn't stop me. I need a cable. There's one, and I'll buy more. Let's just buy more.
See, I'm with you on that. Let's just buy more. Just tell me where you need them and how many we need.
Redundancy.
And let's do it.
You haven't bought enough of them. If it turns out you can't find one, you haven't bought enough.
You need more.
That's right. Okay, Monica.
So mine, I'm just going to go ahead with the one I had at the back because I already mentioned it. And I want it to be novel, but that's okay. But it's cooking. Yeah. Jason could say more about this than I could, but I have never cared quite so much about cooking things right. Right. I'm taking on more ambitious recipes. When I mess up, I'm really mad. And then, to draw the analogy with the power cord while we're playing this game, Jason has definitely, like, come up, to help with some of the ambitious recipes and been like, oh, that mattered? Wait, drying the chicken breast mattered? Yes, it mattered. Yes, it did. It did matter.
You just so we've throw had a little,
one or two tough, tussles there.
Just throw a little random spice into something while she's making it. It's like, I got this out of the cupboard. What do you think? What are you doing? What are you doing?
Oh, but honestly, it has been so lovely to take on a skill that I used to be not only, like, not great at, but really terrible at cooking, and actually feel like I'm getting pretty good if I pay attention, because it doesn't come naturally to me. But if I pay attention and I control the environment and the conditions, we get a damn good meal. And then it's like, oh, here's a thing I can control in a wildly uncertain time that I can be proud of.
What recipe are you most proud of where you're like, yeah, I've got this one?
There's a couple, but French onion soup is coming to mind because that was good. That was good. I'd never made that before. I never would have dreamed of it. It was great.
That's
really good.
So, okay, what's Monica's question?
No, we did
Very
hers
good.
first.
Oh,
Right?
sorry about that.
So I think we're actually good. I think that takes us through it. Thank you very much for joining us today, Monica, again. And Steve, this has been a fun conversation. We'll be doing one of these again next week.
Thanks
is
for
the
putting
plan.
up with me as usual.
And I want to give a quick shout out and thank you to the man behind the scenes, Jeff, who's been helping us make this look nice. We're going to keep, as long as people are enjoying these conversations, we're going to keep trying them. And, we'll get better and better along the way. We'll kind of, if you have a thought about what we could improve or a section we can include or anything like that, please feel free to send it our way to Jason or Steve at dentthefuture.com. Steve.
I will probably get worse at this.
Okay. That's if Steve is getting worse at it, we know we're doing all right.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right.